Dinosaurs had their shot, and nature selected them for extinction. Hey there, Gracious Gang. It's Mike from thegraciousguest.org here with you again for another episode of the Gracious Guest Show. Please, before we begin, do all those things that are so important. Click subscribe on the channel here if you're watching on YouTube. Definitely like this content, share this content far and wide. It helps raise awareness about the channel, the different really cool topics that we get to discuss here on the Gracious Guest Show, especially in these interviews. So please do those things. If you're listening on the podcast, please give me a good review over there wherever you're getting this podcast from, whether it's, oh man, where are we? We're everywhere. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, Stitcher, all of those. It's basically available everywhere. So please go ahead and get subscribed to and connected with this show on YouTube and on the podcast as well. Spread the word far and wide. Now, down to the topic for today. I am so delighted to be rejoined by my new friend Thomas Salerno, who was on the program just a few weeks back, maybe a couple months back, to discuss Ray Bradbury's work and the presence of wonder and awe and that kind of mysteriousness in the works of Ray Bradbury that really invite us to kind of go deeper into deeper themes in life and kind of reflect on really interesting and compelling issues, and so we talked about some of that and getting to know each other a little better. I come to find out that Thomas used to work as a fossil preparator and collections assistant at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And Thomas has some fun stuff to share about that experience, and just more broadly speaking, the topic of dinosaurs, why they captivate us, why we find them interesting, why we find them compelling. What is it about these strange, mysterious creatures that none of us have ever actually seen alive or in person, walking around us or anything like that. Thank goodness that we haven't, because so many of them would eat us right at the moment that they see us. But at any rate, considering these creatures and what they were and what they mean and what they can tell us about God, where are they in the Bible and in our if you're a person of faith, there's questions about are dinosaurs referenced in scripture or not, So a lot of these things and more we get into in this interview, so I think you're really going to enjoy it. Check out my interview with Thomas Salerno, all about dinosaurs. All right, Thomas, welcome back to the Gracious Guest Show.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me back. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no, and it's I forgot my normal slogan there is thank you for being my gracious guest, so that of course as well. So but this is so funny because this I can't remember if we specifically mentioned this or if I mentioned it. I know we talked about it in our first show that we did on Ray Bradbury and kind of wonder and awe in his writings, and I think it was after we were done with the recording that we were just chatting and we're like, let's talk about dinosaurs.
Yes.
So this is a relatively quick turnaround, which doesn't normally happen on this show. So I'm excited, and I'll tell you later. I already have an idea for another one.
Oh boy,
totally different topic. So I've been excited to share that with you later. But let's jump into this. Here we are. This show's just literally called Dinosaurs, and you're wearing. And you're saying people can't see the bottom of it there, but it's Park Ranger, of course. I don't have, unfortunately, any flair. I was even telling my wife, I'm looking around like, do we have like a single like dinosaur toy around here? And for some reason, no. I don't know if it's because we have little girls, but I'm like, girls like dinosaurs too,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So what I should have done was when I was at my parents' house the other night, I should have rummaged around in the basement for all the old Jurassic Park stuff, which is down there still. So, but let me just kick it off here with just in general, would you say we're having this conversation about dinosaurs? What are your initial sort of like reasons for wanting to have a chat about this subject?
Well, I think it's because dinosaurs are always kind of in, right? They're always popular. Ever since the word was first coined back in the 1830s by a guy named Richard Owen, a British anatomist, dinosaurs were just kind of on the scene. The public loved it. And ever since, sure, maybe it's kind of waxed and waned a bit, but I feel like Dinomania has never truly gone away. And in the last few decades, Jurassic Park certainly helped, keep that flame alive. I think everyone loves dinosaurs. Everyone goes through that kind of dinosaur phase when they're a kid. I never grew out of it, but
right, yeah,
but yeah, like most kids, like even like kids I know, both my very young cousins and kids who I know in the neighborhood love dinosaurs, and I just feel that there's so much to talk about this subject and that may surprise people from a faith perspective, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
Oh yeah. Well, it's funny because I don't want to spoil the words that you used, as far as vocab potentially in the email exchange, because we'll get to that in a sec. But this is my little flip book that I carry with me. It's like a little detective thing. But I was sitting in the doctor's office this morning, and I was like, I didn't want to be like, everybody else and myself usually, where you sit down and you have like 10 seconds go by at most, and you pull the phone out. I'm as guilty of that as anybody. But I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm doing this show tonight on dinosaurs, and I just get a little book out, and I'm like, what are some words that I think of when I think of dinosaurs? And I wrote these down. So, off the top of my head, mysterious, scary, awe-inspiring. Then I wrote in all caps, lived so long ago.
Yeah.
Like that, the magnitude of that, I think we could talk about too.
So long
Nostalgia
ago
factor.
that there's more time between the two dinosaurs, Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus Rex. More time elapses between those two species than between Tyrannosaurus Rex and today.
Right.
So the amount of time we're talking about where they dominated the Earth is mind-bendingly large.
Well, and of course, our with both of us, being SQPN, StarQuest panelists for various shows and stuff. Shout out to Jimmy Akin of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, who was just recently, I think it was recently, or maybe in the last year, I want to say, I think he was on Matt Fradd's show, Pints with Aquinas, and was talking about the question of Genesis and the creation story of human beings, and all these questions, which that's a whole other subject, like, how old are we? How's the Bible relate to the historical fossil record? We'll talk about some of that as it pertains to the dinosaurs later. But even if you take, like Jimmy was talking about, if I'm remembering correctly here, that about 100,000 years ago, you see, as he described them, basically anatomically modern humans. So we are basically physically evolved more or less to where we're at now, say 100,000 years ago, if I'm getting the numbers right. But then you start to see more behaviorally modern humans a little after that, and then maybe 50, 60, whatever thousand years ago, again, if I'm getting these numbers generally right, a little bit more maybe, or maybe that was the behaviorally modern, sort of. But the point being,
and in fact,
even
that's
if you go back further than that, or my only point was just if you go back further than that, that's a meaningless amount of time.
Right.
Like our entire presence, like even the even if you want to go further than that and say, like some
2 million
Homo
years.
sapiens,
Yeah.
2 million, right?
Of,
and
genus
precursors and hominids, right? That's like
a drop in
30 times more time than that back to when the dinosaurs went extinct,
right?
And then hundreds of millions of years before that of their predominance as the predominant terrestrial vertebrates, right?
Right.
And so it's just like insane. So just that alone. And then I just put down cool. Like, they're just cool. They're not, like, they wouldn't be cool if I had to worry about them on my way to, like, my Jeep or something being picked off by a velociraptor. But it's like, I wonder if there's almost like do you think there's like the long-winded way of me asking, do you think there's something to the sort of mystique of it, with the very reason that we don't have to deal with these things and never could, of course, like, with them in the same space, they'd eat us.
Yeah,
we would not. But like, we have a little bit of a safety there where we can kind of look at them from this like more afar a little bit and appreciate them.
Right. Yeah, and like there's a lot of connection to a lot of our mythological creatures are often reptilian, dragons and stuff like that. And so it's almost like dinosaurs represent like something that's real, that resembles that. And there are all kinds of theories about where the dragon motif comes into like human evolutionary psychology, and how the dragon is kind of like an amalgamation of all of the different predators that would have menaced our ancestors, big cats, birds of prey because they can fly, serpents because they're scaly and reptilian. And it's almost like dinosaurs kind of tick that switch in our brains where we're like, we're terrified of them, but we're also fascinated, you know?
Sure. And I wonder if there's also, because that's such a good point that you bring up there, and that's, you know, I was talking to my students about this, and maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but is it okay if I make a connection here to the scriptural question?
Oh, yeah.
Because I think it relates, you know, because people will say, like I said earlier, you know, where are the dinosaurs in the Bible? And, you know, and I always try to point out, well, the word dinosaur isn't in the Bible, but it isn't anywhere prior to 1830 either.
Exactly.
You know, like the word itself. And because that alone is an important thing to have a discussion about, certainly in theology, is like the words, things, fallacy. Just because you don't find a word for it doesn't mean, or just because a word is made up doesn't mean the thing didn't precede it. Like Trinity, you know, the word Trinity was made up to label a reality that has always existed. It's the fundamental reality of all. And so that's where I love to look at, like, and I never thought of that until probably college. And I forget where I first heard this idea of like, well, read in Genesis, the creation story. You know, it doesn't really say in Hebrew, and then on the fifth day, God made the birds and the fish. It says the flying things and the swimming things, basically. Their taxonomy was completely different.
Right.
You know, a bird and a bat flying around, it's rational to categorize those two together.
Yeah,
you know?
as a flying thing.
Right. So, could a pterodactyl fit in that same, you know, because Genesis isn't talking about a precise scientific timeline. It's talking about God creating according to certain categories that are logical and make sense, and that everything is in its appropriate habitat. You know, it's not really dealing with, is this a few days or millions of years? So I don't know if you want to, you know, through that lens a little bit, or maybe like think about some of these biblical question marks, at least, about creatures you mentioned, I think, in your email.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, and a lot of people, because when I was a teenager, I encountered the sort of biblical fundamentalist idea about dinosaurs. And that how, like, you know, oh, well, you know, the Earth is only between 6,000 and 10,000 years old, and dinosaurs lived with humans and all that. Which really doesn't hold...
Or that God created the world 6,000 years ago with a fossil record already in it to kind of like flesh the story out, but that they didn't actually really exist and walk the earth. There's different theories
right,
of that,
which seems a little like... I've heard that referred to as God the Magician, where he just kind of creates this fake history, which is totally not how he normally operates. But in any case...
And far less interesting.
Far less interesting. But, like, a lot of the things they would point to is that they would point to the book of Job, where I believe it's in the 40th or 41st chapter of the book of Job. God takes Job on this grand tour of the universe. He shows him all the things that he's created and says, like, where were you when I made this or where I made that? Because Job is trying to accuse God of not running the universe right because he's suffering. Right. And God is like, well, where were you?
God's kind of snarky a little bit in a
like,
hilarious
where
sort of
way. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And he's like, where were you when I created Behemoth and Leviathan? And biblical fundamentalists will often point to those two creatures and say, see, dinosaurs. But the problem is that I think those two creatures are ambiguous enough that they really more represent that kind of expression of the kind of dragon archetype in that is found across cultures, you know, and cultures don't always call them dragons, but there's, you know, this giant reptilian monster archetype. Right. And it's like Behemoth bears some similarity to the hippopotamus, but it's not quite there. And the Leviathan sort of resembles a crocodile, but it can breathe fire. And like, so it's like, I really think that those creatures are more supposed to be indicative of God saying, I created the entire universe and everything that's in it, including all of these majestic creatures from throughout time and space and history that you, Job, can't even comprehend.
Right, like the absolute unimaginable complexity of a crocodile, just as what it is, and compare that with what we know now about like Saturn, or like string theory type stuff. There's all kinds of like just the magnitude of the creative power of God. And like, I heard Peter Kraft once say God's whole speech to Job is tantamount to just basically patting him on the head and saying, "Be quiet, you silly child, you couldn't possibly understand."
Right, yeah.
Right? Like it's just...
I've heard it compared to trying to explain your home library to your dog.
Right.
Like...
Oh, yeah. Like,
here's the Encyclopedia Britannica. And it's like,
right.
Like...
Here's Dickens, the Dickens shelf, and, here's Nicholas Nickleby versus Tale of Two Cities, and here's, it's like, ball, please, like, okay. But well, actually, let me ask you, because on that same sort of line, with dinosaurs specifically, this, like, how do we even begin to comprehend, and do you think that maybe that is part of the very reason why we're so fascinated, because like we can study them, and actually maybe you could talk here a little bit about your background in the museum work you did with just, there you are, tactile, sort of, you're with these bones and you're in this world, but I would imagine that would even magnify the mystery of it even more.
That's the most amazing thing ever, is to, from my point of view, is to hold these fossils. Because like you're touching something. Okay, it's been turned to stone. It's been petrified essentially.
Right.
But you're holding something that is millions of years old and was alive, was part of a living creature, and a living creature that no longer exists, and is so different from the types of creatures we have today that it's almost like like you said, you it starts to bend your mind. You have a bit of a difficulty comprehending it. You almost get vertigo, in a sense, if you start thinking about it too much, But like, I would have moments in the collections, opening up cases and taking out drawers full of fossils, and I would just have moments where I would be holding this and say, like, this is 100 million years old. And just my mind being blown by that. And that this was part of
I bet it's hard to stay on task sometimes.
Yeah.
You're just like, okay, I got to get back to, but it's like,
this is part of what was a living, breathing, moving creature that reproduced, ate, did everything that modern animals do. And then your mind starts wandering, and you start imagining what it would have been like as a living thing. Yeah. Which is just fascinating. Like, I really think that's part of the fascination for people. It's just imagining what they would have been like. Because they're so bizarre. Especially with a lot of the recent finds, which I'll get to maybe towards the end, is that they're more bizarre than we thought 30 years ago.
Well, do you want to go into some of that now, or did you want to wait? Because I'm curious now myself.
Yeah, so I actually have some recommendations for your listeners and viewers. Yeah. And one of the books that I'd like to recommend to people is Weird Dinosaurs. By Weird Dinosaurs by John Pickrell from Australian Geographic. This book is great because it covers basically the new discoveries from the last 10, 20 years. Have upended just our previous ideas about dinosaurs. They are stranger, more bizarre, have more bizarre anatomy and functions than we ever could have thought possible.
Yeah.
I remember...
Is that some, like, are there some things I've heard? Now, I haven't looked into it much, and now I really want to, of course, but I remember hearing just a few years ago, at least some more speculation about not just the sort of evolution we see into the sort of modern... different species of birds, a sort of I think birds are aren't they even classified as avian dinosaurs?
Avian dinosaurs, yeah.
But I've heard some studies or whatever where they're suggesting that some of the dinosaurs that we didn't used to think of this way back then may have been feathered as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is
the evidence
interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Like they're just huge birds, which is like terrifying in and of itself.
And more dinosaurs are feathered than we thought even 5 years ago. We're discovering now that feathers are a very primitive condition. They did not evolve for flight. They probably evolved for display purposes at first, and for insulation.
Insulation, mating type.
Mating, display.
And the colors, I'm imagining, like, you always, like, all the, like, when I'm a kid, and probably when you were a kid too, it's like, they're so cool, but it's like, they're big and hulking and kind of slow and brown
or
gray
green
and like green, But and it's like,
you want to know what's cool though? We now know what some of the colors of dinosaurs were.
This is what,
because and I was always told as a kid, we'll never know what color they were, but because some of them are feathered, we can look at these fossilized feathers under a microscope, and you can discover these little microscopic packets of pigment called melanosomes that have been fossilized.
That's awesome.
And they can
I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, and they can discover from them, this dinosaur was kind of a rusty orange feathered color. This one was green. This one was iridescent black like a crow. And
oh man,
it just blows your mind that we are now discovering what color they were, how they raised their young, how they interacted as groups, whether some predators were cooperative hunters like modern wolves or lions. Just the amount of knowledge we have today would have staggered paleontologists 100 years ago.
And I'm doing some Google searches as I go here for some of the rainbow colored. Like there's this one that's like this. It looks almost like it's some kind of raptor, but it's like varying colors of like it's almost like peacock type coloring,
right?
And with razor sharp teeth, and I'm just looking at this thing. I'm like, oh, I'm glad it's not around today. I keep going back
yes,
to that.
Yeah.
Like,
I also want to recommend
like crazy
The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs.
Okay,
and this is by
who's that one by?
Steve Brusati, and he's a paleontologist. He's an American expat living in England, where he teaches.
Okay,
and this book is probably the best one-volume summary of our current state of knowledge that pretty much anyone can pick up and read. It's done in a real accessible style, and I love it. And it covers, like Weird Dinosaurs, it covers a lot of the up-to-date science.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, and this I'm just there's like so many. Cool
Once you start
Googling
dinosaurs, it's a black hole.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and what do you think about, so when we talked a little bit in before the show about the I guess the deeper meanings, and we've covered some of that already, but you want to speak to that a little bit as far as what you had mentioned, about I brought this up before with you on our last show about that C.S. Lewis line that I love and I go back to over and over from The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where they meet that retired star basically who's sort of in this human form, and that really, I think, insightful message that Lewis is getting across in there, that when I think it's Eustace, the character who says, in our world stars are just gas, and the Star says to him, even in your world, that's not what stars are. That's just what they're made of. And this reductionist move that we fall into so frequently, where everything's just matter. It's like a fundamental materialism that I think our society, of course, tends to kind of operate on. So what do you think, like in that kind of mode, what kinds of messages, in a sense, or what kinds of themes or things about God even in his creation do you think kind of come through this strange number of species from so long ago?
Well, you were doing it before in listing all those words that just came to mind about dinosaurs.
Right.
Like you think of the majesty, and especially the large species, the majesty, the glory, ferocity. Now, are these things that we are psychologically projecting, or are they something real that we're intuiting about dinosaurs? Like I like to use the example of a lion, where what are the first words you think of regal, noble, courageous. Like, Freud would probably say, oh, you're just psychologically projecting those qualities onto a dumb animal. Whereas C.S. Lewis would say, no, you're intuiting something real about lionness, about the nature of what it is to be a lion. And so are we intuiting something similar about these extinct creatures, about dinosaurs? Are we intuiting something real about God, about his majesty, his glory, his power? You know, that because God is reflected in everything he creates. Yes, he explicitly created human beings after his image and likeness, but really his image and likeness is reflected in a sense in everything that he has made because they share in his being, in a sense, because God is the fundamental ground of all being. He is to be itself. He is the very act of existence. So all contingent existing things participate in his existence. So he's really reflected in all creation. And so I think whether it's dinosaurs or lions or stars, I think we can learn something true and real about God by studying any natural phenomenon. And when I worked in museum science, that was something I always tried to keep in mind. You know, when I'm studying these things, I'm not just reducing them to numbers and measurements. You know, I'm learning something about God's creation, and through that, ultimately about God himself. I like to think that with some of these new discoveries, God has a sense of humor when he created certain dinosaurs. Like, look up Spinosaurus. Look up some of the recent discoveries about Spinosaurus. And it was kind of a quirky animal. God definitely has a sense of humor.
Well, and it's and that's I just kind of our closing minutes. I thought just it might be fun to ask you about, you know, in your museum experience in terms of different kinds of fossils that you got to work with, or different overall experiences you had. What was maybe your favorite one or two, or something that really stood out to you as far as the specific kind of work in this realm of you know, anything dinosaur related?
I would have to say that probably my favorites were actually from before I worked at the American Museum in New York City. I worked in the anatomy department at Stony Brook University, where I went to college, and they had a paleontology program that went every year to Madagascar to dig up dinosaur fossils from near the end of the age of dinosaurs. And since Madagascar, even back then, was an island, the dinosaurs are really weird, because when animals are isolated on islands, evolution tends to run wild with some of the designs. And some of the dinosaurs I worked on, you know, preparing the fossils, cleaning off sediment, were just really weird. One of my favorites was Majungasaurus, which is the largest meat eater from that time of Madagascar. And it's this vaguely T-Rex kind of dinosaur, but has even stumpier, sillier arms than Tyrannosaurus Rex did. Its arms couldn't even face forward. They kind of stuck out from its back. It's very bizarre-looking. Its arms were functionally useless, and it just has this head with all these odd knobs and bumps, probably for display. It was a very silly-looking dinosaur, but it wouldn't have been silly if it was running you down, though, with its mouth open.
It doesn't need arms.
No, and there's a smaller predator from Madagascar called Mashika Saurus, which has these it has these teeth that almost protrude from its mouth to form what some paleontologists have speculated is kind of a fish trap. Almost
I'm looking at it now. That's nuts.
So that it could, you know, dart its head into the water and capture fish. It's just a bizarre-looking creature. Yeah, the Madagascar dinosaurs are spectacularly weird, and I love them.
So were you in? Did you go to Madagascar for that?
Unfortunately, no. I never got the chance to go on the field expeditions. I was more of the lab guy. We had specimens that were backlogged from years of previous expeditions.
Oh, wow.
That I was able to work on. And not just dinosaurs, some mammals from the time of the dinosaurs as well, which,
oh yeah,
because they're on Madagascar, are really weird and bizarre. And, and one of them was just published a few years ago, actually, that I had worked on when it was still secret, and no one could talk about it because it was still under study. But yeah, oh my gosh, there's... All the dinosaurs I knew as a kid are kind of old hat now because there's been so many new discoveries that I have a hard time keeping up with all the new species that are named every year.
Sure. Well, and that's because, and you'd hear, getting back a little bit, we have a few minutes left, but just I wanted to circle back to something kind of related to what you mentioned earlier about, again, this yes, we are discovering so much and continuing to do so, but then I think because of that, sometimes people make that mistake of thinking that people way back when didn't know anything, and that's what's so cool to go back and look at. I've seen ancient records or references to Caesars having giant teeth that they found, or because you're doing these big building projects like Roman Empire, Greek Empire before them, of course, and you're moving a lot of earth and you're gonna find stuff. It's not like we were the first people to start digging.
Oh, yeah.
And so I love that idea of you imagine you live a couple hundred years ago, whatever, a couple thousand years ago, and what?
Oh, no, absolutely.
Or there's an earthquake, right? That or an ice sheet or something moves, whatever it is, and it's what is that giant hairy elephant, or what is that enormous dragon head, and it's like a T-Rex skull or something, and it's so cool to think about that kind of thing too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We know that, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, Native Americans here in the United States, before European contact, knew that there were giant bones that eroded out of the desert, in certain places. And, they didn't know they were dinosaurs from, a modern scientific point of view, but they interpreted them, fit them into their worldview, their legends, their own mythic cycles and scriptures. And, and some of them actually were able to interpret them as, these were, giant elephants, or, because, you find bones of mammoth and mastodon, which are not dinosaurs. But, I think there's a very good book, which I actually don't have with me. It's called The First Fossil Hunters. And it's about this very topic. And it talks about a lot that we don't give ancient people a lot of credit for being, able to recognize, oh, that's a petrified bone. Like you said, this knowledge has been there for a long time. It's just that through the centuries, we're developing new tools to discover all new kinds of knowledge. Like I said, paleontologists 100 years ago would never have known to look. One, they would never have known to look for feathered dinosaurs. Second, even if they had found one, like, say, Archaeopteryx, the famous specimen that was discovered in 1865, they would never have thought to use a microscope to look for microscopic pigment packets. So I think...
It's so cool.
We can't even imagine what 2 decades from now we'll know. And I can't wait to see what's in store for us.
Well, Thomas, I'm afraid we're going to have to kind of bring it to a close for now, but we'll meet up again for another fun chat before too long, I'm sure. But before we close, I do want to ask you, if I had to put you on the spot right now, or I am putting you on the spot, if you had to say right now, what's your favorite dinosaur of all? From your youth all the way up till now, do you have one?
Oh, no question, Tyrannosaurus Rex. And I know that's kind of a stock answer, but he's been my favorite since I was a kid. And
he's legit.
Yeah, he's legit to the point that my 13-year-old self was traumatized seeing the T-Rex lose to the Spinosaurus in Jurassic Park 3. I got over it eventually, but no, I love Tyrannosaurus Rex, and that is actually one of the dinosaurs we know the most about now, because it's so popular with the public that scientists love to go back and study it. So definitely
revisit it more.
Revisit it. So yeah, definitely one of my top favorite, no question.
Yep, I think I'm right there with you.
Nice.
Well, hey, thanks again so much, and I'll definitely catch up with you again soon on yet another topic.
Thanks so much, Mike, and thanks you to all your viewers and listeners for enduring my excited ramblings about dinosaurs. And I can't wait I can't wait to catch up with you again.
Yeah, hey, God bless. We'll see you.
God bless.
What a blast that was. And so I love chatting with him just about pretty much anything under the sun, and we're definitely going to have Thomas back on. So thank him again so much for coming on today. Thank you all, Gracious Gang, for joining me and Thomas here on the Gracious Guest Show. Another great, enjoyable time here, hopefully had by all in this experience where we contemplate wonder and awe, trying to grow in our capacity to be filled with awe and wonder at the world around us and everything in it as reflections of this great creator who wants us to be in relationship with him now and for eternity. So please make sure you check out all those links below, including a book that Thomas forgot to mention in the interview portion, but a really interesting point of view novel about a dinosaur told from the dinosaur's perspective. He said there's not a whole lot of good dinosaur fiction, but this is one he highly recommends. So we included that below in the show notes. As I said at the beginning of the show, subscribe, share this far and wide, like this content, and until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.